And what I hope is that today we're going to start using a really awesome program called Tinkercad. I know most of you have already used Tinkercad. It's a 3D modeling program that's available on the website, tinkercad.com. You don't have to download it. You don't have to learn very much because it's very intuitive to use. So what I would like you to do is once you're signed in, you're going to end up at a big homepage like this. Everyone's homepage is going to look like this. And it's going to say my recent designs. Now, I haven't created any designs yet in this fake student account. So I'm going to go to create new design and I'm going to click on it. And this is going to take us to the Tinkercad Workspace that probably a lot of you are already familiar with. So here I have this fun workspace to work in. I see an empty work plane, this blue grid. And on the right side here, I have a menu of shapes. Now, when I was learning to draw, when I was learning to design and build things, I learned that every complicated shape, be it a horse, be it a sculpture, be it a building, be it a vehicle, is made of a lot of simpler shapes. And that's the way we're going to work in this program. We're going to grab a simple shape like a box. You can drag it out into your workspace and click on it. Now, if you grab the white boxes at the corners of your object, you can change the size and dimensions of your shape. You could turn a box into a really flat sheet. You could grab the white box at the top to make it taller and turn it into a tall building. It's all up to you. The other thing we can do is combine different shapes, as I said. So if I drag a cylinder out into this world, I can also put the two together. Now, in real life, you can't put two objects in the same space because they bump into each other and they would never actually be able to join together. But in Tinkercad, it's actually a really good thing to put two objects in the same space so they overlap. If I put my cylinder and my box together, they become part of one object. And pretty soon, just as an experiment for now, I could start to make kind of a cool building. Um, Now, these tools on the left change your viewpoint, and they're super important because in 3D, you're going to have to constantly change the direction you're viewing your work from in order to see it clearly. If you're not looking from different directions all the time, you're going to miss a lot of things. And I noticed that some adults who learn this much slower than children often forget to change their viewpoint. And they make something that looks good from one direction, and then they look at it from another side and they're like, whoa, this looks all wrong. So you have the plus and the minus, which allow you to zoom in and out to change your viewpoint. You can zoom in with the plus if you want to look at something and work on a small detail very carefully. And you can use the minus when you want to zoom out and look at what your whole project looks like. And you can grab this cube and rotate it when you want to change your point of view. So that's really important. And finally, when you add an object, you can change its color, because I know making things have cool colors is important. So I can drag this sort of roof type piece out. And when I drag it out, it's going to offer me the option to change this solid color. And instead of green, to better match our warm colored building, I'm going to choose yellow. And I'm going to drag it to make the point of our roof really tall. And then I'm going to grab the whole object and slide it over. And then to move our object up, you need to grab this black arrow right here. This controls the vertical movement, this tiny black arrow on the top. So I'm going to slide it way up. I'm going to make sure it's still overlapping with my red rectangle so that they're part of the same building. And then I'm going to drag these white squares to move the corners so that as we rotate it, I can make sure that my roof of my building matches up with the rest of my building. And I'm just constantly changing my viewpoint, as you can see, so I can make sure everything's right. So these black squares will also allow you to adjust the dimensions side to side. And the white square will allow you to, on the top, will allow you to adjust how tall your object is. So we want a really pointy roof in this case. So I think it's really important to name everything you're working on in this class. So I'm going to name this tall, pointy building. Otherwise, it's going to give your project a nonsense name, and nonsense names aren't really that helpful. It's going to be helpful to all of us as a class as we start to build parks and buildings and vehicles to be able to keep track of everything that we're working on. So just give it a name that makes sense. And right here, the arrow button is undo. So if I mess up and I want to go back, it's very easy to go back a bunch of steps and then to go forward again and make sure that your project is just right. Now we're going to work mostly with basic shapes, but if you wanted to, there's all sorts of weird shapes down here, and you can import shapes that other people have made. I like the characters because under the characters menu, you can grab a little person. And for a lot of our projects, I think it's going to be useful to have a person to give us a sense of what is the right size for our project. So this person is basically like a giant that would destroy a city right now because they're as tall as a skyscraper. So I'm going to make them much, much smaller so that they kind of fit into the world that I'm creating here. So now I have a person that is still pretty big for a skyscraper, but is more of the right size. And finally, you can edit your grid. So this grid here is right now millimeters, but I like to use inches because I'm used to that. And I like to have a sense of how big my object would be in real life. So I'm going to put 12 inches by 12 inches as the size of my grid, because that way I know everything I'm making is like imagining that it's on a 1 foot by 1 foot table. And now we have a 1 inch grid. So if I wanted to go to school and 3D print some of these objects that you make, which I could do, it would be really helpful to know how big they are so that I can make sure they would actually fit in our 3D printer.